Welcome to our briefing on the Office for Environmental Protection, the OEP's assessment of government's progress in improving the natural environment in the period April 2023 to the end of March 2024. I'm Professor Robbie McDonald, Chief Scientist at the OEP, and I'll introduce this year's report and give a little background before handing over to Dr. Cathy Maguire, our Head of Assessments, who will talk you through our approach and our key findings. Let's start with that background and why we're doing what we're doing. In 2021, Parliament passed the Environment Act, which established a new system of environmental governance for England. First, it put in place legally binding targets that set ambitions and timelines for significant environmental improvement in vital areas including air quality, water, biodiversity, and resources and waste. Second, a set of environmental principles that must be considered by all ministers to ensure environmental improvement and sustainable development. Third is the Environmental Improvement Plan, or EIP, which is a long-term plan that must set out how government intends to improve the natural environment. And finally, the fourth provision of the Act is us, the OEP. We were established to make sure that this new system works as it should, that the environment is improved as Parliament intends and in line with environmental law. One thing we must do at the OEP is to report on whether the Environmental Improvement Plan, the EIP, is working and to make our assessment of progress towards meeting the legal targets. Our report today is our third statutory report and covers progress with the EIP published in January 2023 up to the end of March 2024. Since then, there has, of course, been a change in government. Therefore, our report largely addresses progress under the last government, and we've been able to take only limited account of the new government's activities and how these affect prospects of meeting long-term targets. The work of the new government will form part of our report next year. New ministers have also indicated that they will revise the EIP and publish a new plan in early 2025. One of the main shortcomings of EIP 23 is that it lacked attention to how to achieve its ambitions. It was not, in our view, a detailed delivery plan. A review has now been undertaken and a new EIP is in development. And we've given our advice on the attributes of an effective EIP, but most importantly, it will not just set out ambition, but set out the steps for how that ambition will be realised. Even as governments change and EIPs are revised, environmental targets remain as a legal obligation and are a constant towards which progress must be made in order to comply with the law. For the longer-term targets, it might still seem like an early point to assess progress. However, the environment takes time to respond to interventions and to then recover. With ongoing pressures affecting England's environment and with the increasing impacts of global heating, the time to act and the ability to intervene effectively become more and more constrained. So the aim of our assessment is to give an account of progress made, but also of the challenges ahead. Let's move now to our overall findings. Our summary assessment for the year is that rather than picking up the pace, less progress was made during the reporting period than in the preceding year. Our overall assessment of the prospects of meeting Environment Act targets and the ambitions of EIP 23 is unchanged. Government remains largely off track and very substantial challenges lie ahead. We shouldn't fail to recognise improvements where they have been made. We have previously highlighted the improving trends in air quality, particularly in relation to particulate matters, and much has been done to mitigate climate change and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. However, in even these two areas where past trends have been positive, progress during the reporting year was limited. This year also saw some positive developments with increased uptake of agri-environment schemes, but greater participation in more exacting, higher-tier environmental land management schemes is crucial. Land management remains central to much of environmental improvement at scale, and the government must renew and redouble its efforts to engage positively with farmers and landowners, to encourage and enable their participation so as to deliver national ambitions and commitments. England in the end must farm for food and for nature. Looking further ahead towards the prospects of meeting targets, commitments and wider ambitions, and looking across all 10 areas of the Environmental Improvement Plan, our assessment is that none is on track. Prospects are largely off track in no fewer than 7 goal areas and partially on track in the other 3. Our view is that progress has been inadequate because the scale and pace of effort being applied is not sufficient. We have previously called for government to speed up and scale up its efforts and to show how its plans stack up to achieve and fulfil its legal obligations. But with each passing year, with past rates of change and with global heating progressing apace, the window of opportunity to redress harms is closing, while the effort needed and cost to do so is increasing. Therefore, this government must now catch up. Catch up by developing and fully implementing effective plans, and catch up by speeding up progress in improving the environment if it is to meet its legal obligations. Recent years have seen repeated delays, and while the election and the inevitable effects of a change in administration have added to these, it is imperative that the government now takes decisive action. This government must now show leadership in implementing effective and efficient policies for environmental improvement. The government has ambitious plans for housing development and energy infrastructure, addressing vital national needs. But better regulation is an enabler, not a blocker of development that is environmentally, socially, and economically beneficial. While our findings this year are that government remains largely off track to meet its legal obligations to improve the environment, these prospects are not fixed. There are many clear opportunities to change trends, make progress towards targets, and deliver significant environmental improvements. I will return shortly to our recommendations on how progress can be improved, but I'll now hand over to Dr. Cathy Maguire to run through our assessment and findings in more detail.
Our progress report is an assessment of government's progress against the targets and commitments they've set themselves. It's an integrated assessment of England's environment, which means we analyse issues within and across the different areas of the environment and over past, present and future timescales. In carrying out the assessment, we consider the actions that government describes in its annual progress report, as well as a range of wider evidence. When we do our assessment, we look back with a specific focus in the reporting year, in this case April 2023 to March 24, and we look ahead at prospects of meeting ambitions, targets and commitments, so we can make recommendations on how government could improve progress. Our assessment is not just one report. We also publish a methodological statement and our statement of compliance with the Code of Practice for Statistics. Together these set out what we did, how we did it and what we found in a transparent and accessible way. Our assessment is quite comprehensive, so we use summary assessments to present this analysis in a concise way. These summary assessments present an overall picture of past trends, progress within the reporting period, and overall prospects of meeting Environment Act targets and the other ambitions, targets and commitments across the 10 goal areas of the EIP. So let's look at the overall picture. Is England's natural environment improving? Well, viewed against the government's aim of significantly improving the natural environment, our summary assessment remains that while some progress has been made, very substantial challenges remain, and the government is largely off track to meet its commitments. But let's look at this in more detail, starting with environmental trends. We used a range of environmental indicators to look at key trends across the EIP goal areas. These are a broad set of indicators, but they do not capture all the aspects of each goal area, so they can only provide a partial picture. But it is one that looks across a wide range of topics and is informative. There are also data gaps and issues with timeliness of data, which we highlight in our report. Overall, our assessment of 59 recent short-term trends show that 25 are improving, 15 are static, 12 are deteriorating, and 7 we could not assess due to data availability. Improving and deteriorating trends were observed across most EIP goal areas. For example, in relation to the natural environment, while there are signs that the downward trajectory in England's species abundance is slowing, wider biodiversity trends continue to deteriorate, and some pressures on biodiversity have not decreased. The overall state of the water environment remains challenging, with deteriorating trends observed in the marine environment in particular. However, when it comes to reducing overall levels of pollution, there are improving trends regarding reductions in specific air pollutants, specific chemicals, and greenhouse gases. Trends in patterns of production and consumption are mixed. While resource productivity has improved, resource use is increasing, and there's been little change in England's carbon footprint. And while residual waste generation is stabilised, recycling rates continue to stall. Regarding human health and well-being, improving trends dominate for air quality, although some standards are still being exceeded. This assessment of individual trends forms part of our overall assessment at EIP goal level, where we conclude that in one goal area, clean air, and for climate mitigation, improving trends dominate. In 7 goal areas and for climate adaptation, trends show a mixed picture, and in one goal area, enhancing biosecurity, deteriorating trends dominate, particularly in relation to invasive species. Now let's look at progress within the reporting year. In assessing progress, we looked at whether policies and actions are comprehensive, that is, do they cover the most important issues? Are they credible? Is their development and delivery of high quality? And are they coherent, that they work well together to achieve the intended impacts? We assess progress towards meeting 43 individual targets and commitments, including the Environment Act targets, as well as overall progress by EIP goal area. Our assessment of these shows that good progress has been made towards 10, mixed progress towards 17, and limited progress towards 15. We couldn't assess progress towards 1 due to a lack of sufficient evidence. And if we look specifically at the 13 Environment Act targets, good progress has been made towards 3, mixed progress towards 9, and limited progress towards 1. Areas where good progress has been made mainly relate to tackling specific sources of water pollution, chemical pollution, and greenhouse gases. In relation to the natural environment, while progress on environmental land management, or ELM schemes, has continued, progress was much more limited across wider actions and policies essential to nature's recovery, most noticeably in the freshwater and marine environments. There was also limited progress in relation to patterns of production and consumption, including improving resource productivity, eliminating avoidable waste, and more sustainable use of natural resources. Again, regarding human health and well-being, there was limited progress regarding some air pollutants and reducing the risk of exposure to high temperatures. So at EIP goal level, we conclude that in 5 goal areas progress has been mixed, and in 5 goal areas progress has been limited. Compared with last year, there's less progress in relation to the goals of clean air and maximising our resources, minimising our waste. Now let's turn to future prospects. This year, we've also assessed the prospects of meeting those 43 individual targets and commitments, as well as the overall prospects by EIP goal area. Regarding the individual targets and commitments, our assessment is the government is largely on track to meet 9, partially on track towards meeting 11, and largely off track towards meeting 20. And again, if we look specifically at the 13 Environment Act targets, here the government is largely on track to meet 3, partially on track for 4, and largely off track to meet 5, and the prospects of meeting 1 couldn't be assessed. Those areas where prospects are largely on track, again mainly relate to specific air pollutants such as PM2.5, specific sources of water pollution such as phosphorus loadings from wastewater, chemical pollution such as land-based emissions of mercury, and specific greenhouse gases such as hydrofluorocarbons. In relation to the natural environment, while the prospects of achieving nature-friendly farming commitments are partially on track, prospects relating to the wider actions and policies essential to nature's recovery are largely off track. This is mostly due to continued delays and a lack of urgency in the implementation of important actions in the freshwater and marine environments. Also, sustainable soil management remains a significant gap. The prospects of meeting targets and commitments related to patterns of production and consumption are also largely off track, and in relation to human health and well-being, while the prospects of meeting the 2 Environment Act targets for PM2.5 are largely on track, the same cannot be said for other air pollutants. In addition, there's a persistent lack of progress in reducing exposure and vulnerability to climate change risks, and a clear need to increase the scale and pace of adaptation actions to improve the prospects of meeting targets and commitments across many EIP goal areas. So at EIP goal level, we conclude that in 3 areas the government is partially on track, and in 7 the government is largely off track. Compared with last year, our assessment ratings have not changed, but we've now been able to assess the goal of enhancing beauty, heritage and engagement, which we assess as partially on track. So what is holding back progress? In our last report, we identified factors impeding progress and prospects, including delays in key policies, strategies and regulatory frameworks. Actions do not address all major pressures. Resources are not being given as needed, even when tools and actions are well understood, and there's a lack of urgency with which positive actions are implemented. These all apply this year as much as last. Last year, we identified many opportunities for improvement, and made recommendations focused on addressing barriers and harnessing opportunities. Of those 52 recommendations, we can identify good progress on only 5 over the last year. In addition, our assessment of progress and prospects continues to be hampered by the level of detailed information made available by government and gaps in monitoring systems. In particular, the degree of disclosure and transparency of delivery planning information to date is not consistent with that needed for public scrutiny or government accountability. Well, how can progress be improved? In many instances, well-established solutions exist and their implementation is feasible with sufficient support, but in many areas the scale and pace of actions are currently falling short. Many long-term targets are unlikely to be met with existing policy interventions if current trends continue. Repeated delays also mean that strategic and delivery plans have not kept pace with the real and significant environmental challenges we face, so plans also need now to catch up and then keep up. But these prospects are not fixed. There are clear opportunities to shape a more positive future, but to do so the government will need to act quickly to make up lost ground. However, the effectiveness of policy measures will be limited if they do not tackle the underlying causes of environmental degradation, and these are related to the societal systems that meet our needs for food, energy, mobility and the built environment. And there's also a need to improve policy coherence, harness synergies and deal transparently with trade-offs. The government now has an opportunity with the EIP revision to improve delivery and also improve integration of environment and climate policies to achieve a significant environmental improvement. So I'm going to hand back to Robbie, who's going to set out what we think are the key areas for action to achieve this.
Let's move on then to our recommendations on how progress could be improved. The government has a series of legally binding and other commitments for 2030, but it's only 5 years away, and the revised EIP to be published later this year therefore covers nearly all of that period. It will therefore be a critical plan for England's environment. With the delays, pressures and adverse trends across the environment up to now, this new plan must and can offer a way forward that ensures the environment is improved and the law is complied with. This government's revised EIP needs to go beyond setting new ambitions. It must be a plan for actions and should set out clearly how these actions will, with certainty, make achieving targets and commitments a reality. We make 8 key recommendations for actions and enablers that will deliver benefits across EIP goals, address the government's environmental priorities, and contribute to meeting several legally binding targets. Greater scale and pace is needed with respect to each of these recommended actions if the government is to secure the long-term improvements to which it is committed. Let's start with the necessary actions. Key recommendation 1 is to get nature-friendly farming right. Government has to strengthen its engagement and advisory work with farmers and landowners to achieve its ambitions at scale. Agri-environment schemes are promising, but they rely on greater uptake of more environmentally ambitious countryside stewardship and landscape recovery projects. While schemes could deliver for nature on land, we remain concerned that more must be done for biodiversity in our rivers and lakes. Key recommendation 2 is to maximise the contribution of protected sites for nature. Steps should be taken urgently to correct underinvestment in site designation and management, including implementation of conservation measures, improving monitoring, and strengthening overall governance and engagement with partners. Recommendation 3 is to speed up action in the marine environment. The government did not meet its commitment to ban all damaging activities in marine protected areas in 2024. The latest data from OSPAR confirm the UK will more than likely not have met the legal requirement of marine good environmental status. So government should implement a new UK marine strategy that focuses action on those descriptors not yet at good environmental status to maximise progress and minimise delay in achieving that overall objective. Recommendation 4 is to set out clear mechanisms for reconciling competing demands for use of land and sea. The ways in which land and sea are used are amongst the biggest drivers of biodiversity loss, and environmental pressures will become more acute with the need to develop essential clean energy infrastructure and housing whilst delivering the government's environmental priorities of food security and protecting communities from flooding. Recommendation 5 is to develop a circular economy framework. Progress in this area has been too slow. The government should update the resources and waste strategy to establish a framework for a circular economy, and this would deliver economic benefits and improve environmental outcomes across many areas, including nature's recovery. but it requires the efforts to go well beyond waste management. In addition to these 5 recommendations for action, greater progress will also be enabled with actions on 3 cross-cutting areas. So key recommendation 6 is mobilising investment at the scale needed. Government ambitions for private investment in nature's recovery is a key enabling step to close the finance gap, alongside continued and well-targeted public investment. Given the scale of the challenge, to achieve this, government needs to provide strong incentives, oversight and regulation to create the market confidence to deliver rapid, substantial growth in investment, as well as the capability and capacity of the environmental sector to make the most of that investment. Recommendation 7 is to regulate more effectively. Effective regulation is essential to address the numerous market and other failures that have led to environmental degradation at significant cost to society. It is also needed to ensure economic growth is sustainable, given the reliance of the economy on natural resources, ecosystems and biodiversity. We note DEFRA's review of its current regulation and regulators. However, it should also ensure there is regulatory coherence and efficiency in delivering the government's environmental goals alongside its wider mission on economic growth. Finally, our 8th recommendation is to harness the support needed to achieve ambitions. The government needs to provide clear leadership at the highest level to ensure cross-government delivery and wider stakeholder buy-in. A revised EIP should be far more transparent and better communicated. It should explicitly state who will do what, how and by when, and detail what the intended outcomes of actions are. The government should couple its implementation with greater engagement with non-governmental bodies and with the public to harness their willingness to contribute. There is support for action on the environment, with the majority of adults reporting climate change and the environment as an important issue for the UK. Steps in the EIP to enhance engagement are important in building that public support for action. In conclusion, our report comes at a time of growing challenges for the environment, but also a time of opportunity. Government needs now to front-load its efforts to catch up its actions to improve the environment and to comply with environmental law. Integration of action to mitigate and adapt to climate change alongside restoring nature on land and at sea is essential for a more prosperous and sustainable future. Only through concerted effort and unwavering commitment can the government hope to achieve the significant environmental improvements that are so urgently needed. It remains to me then to thank all of those who have helped with our evidence and analysis this year and who have helped review our report, to colleagues at the Climate Change Committee, DEFRA, the Environment Agency, Environmental Standards Scotland and in Natural England. Thank you.